Hello everyone, this is Anil Kumar. In this video, we will discuss about the differences between the singleton scope and as well as the prototype scope. So, in the Spring configuration file, I think we have seen the declaration of the kind of several beans like circle bean and the rectangle bean. So, let me demonstrate the scope how it actually works in the context of the this application context. In the scope singleton actually meaning, let me create a bean, okay, so that in the example I can demonstrate. Maybe with an id I will just call it as a reference as a rectangle. I am trying to create here a bean. So in this bean, of course, the class is like the same java com dot java tech dot spring dependency. I think this is the same rectangle class I'm trying to use here to demonstrate. So probably let me close this particular bean tag. So how can we close this? The bean would have a end bean, but in between there is a scope attribute, okay, where we can define. It's a optional attribute where you can define, or even if you are not defined, the default would be it's a singleton, okay. So that's why it won't take like this one. I think there is seems to be a kind of error, right? So what is that error? Am I actually not closing this particular bean properly? Let me save it. If it is an error, it will show, okay. I think it should be fine, more or less fine. uh, yeah, probably I need to end this one, okay. I need to end it. So the default scope is singleton, so this is an optional field, and this also will have a kind of value called prototype. So prototype, this is a very popular interview question. What is the difference between singleton and the prototype? So when to use it, this particular kind of scope attribute. So let me create it. So by default it is a singleton, right? So even if I not mention this particular scope also, it treats as a singleton, and it would only create a one instance of the rectangle object per. Now it's not per JVM. Actually the Java singleton is a different concept altogether, kind of different in between, like it actually create an object per JVM, but here it would create an object per this configuration. Suppose say in this spring.configuration XML, at the context of this configuration, um, in the spring, you can have multiple configuration files like spring 1 xml, spring 2 xml, spring 3 xml, something like that. Is nothing but a kind of like application context, okay. So you can have multiple application context files. So if you define a particular bean in one particular application context XML, okay, in that particular XML it would treat all the rectangle objects as a single object, okay. It would always refer the same thing. Maybe you can define another configuration file as well, to a kind of different rectangle object that would treat it as a separate object. So if you define the same rectangle in two different XMLs, it will treat as a two XMLs. But for timing, you can understand like it would be a like per container, okay, per Java container. You have an application context or bean factory, will treat it as a kind of one container, right? So this object would create only one object per container. So I will try to demonstrate with singleton, okay. First, okay, what I will do is, this is our client code, right? So what I will do is I will try to create an object called rectangle, okay, r1. I will create two instances, and we will see the difference between those two scopes. R1, okay, equal to what you call as a I will read the bean. Okay, context dot get bean. In that bean, what we are reading, it is a rectangle object, right? So yeah, probably I will refer it as a class. I don't want to inject it to the interface for this particular example demonstration, at least. Okay, so rectangle dot class. Okay, I'm just trying to invoke this one. Okay, and what I'm invoking is r1 dot. I will just set. I have. So what is in the rectangle? Let me show it. The rectangle is a class where it has only one attribute. Okay, in this one attribute I just have a setter and getter. Okay, what I am doing here is simply I am setting one parameter. Okay, that is the name as a like object one. Okay, I'm just treating as a object one, and in the same context I am just trying to get the name. Okay, so obviously, right, this will print the object one. Okay, in the rectangle. So to actually illustrate this example, I'm also uh, see, for quicker coding perspective, I'm just copying and creating another object. Okay, r2, a rectangle of the same class. I'm creating another object. Okay, here I am not setting. Okay, in the second attribute, in the second instance I am not setting, rather I am trying to just refer the same object. Sorry, I want to invoke the get name for the second object. Okay, so ideally, if it is a kind of every time it has to create a new object, then it needs to have a kind of two different objects. But right now our application scope I defined as a singleton. Even if you are not defining also, the default will be treat as a singleton. It will always, whatever how many times you will call the particular method, it will always return the same object. Okay, for this container. So I'm creating a two objects. It should actually refer the same thing, right? Same object one. So let me run this particular example. Okay, uh, click on run. Okay, so it is executing. See, because the scope is a singleton, it is always getting called the same object. So it is taking the same reference of the object one only. Even though it is another rectangle instance, it is taking the same old r1 object only, because it is a singleton, only one object. So let me change this to prototype and see the behavior. Okay, now comes the magic. Prototype. What do you expect the output? Proto prototype. Okay, you need to be correct in the spelling. Okay, prototype. If I define the prototype and I am running the same example, okay, I am not changing any client code. I have created a r1 object and just referring in the r2 in the same object. Let me run this application, see the behavior. What it has done, see, it has uh, set the object one. Okay, in the first instance, but in the second instance it's altogether a kind of new object, right? So every invocation for a prototype scope, every instance it will create a new object. So the new object get name is a, we haven't set right anything, so that is a null. So this example illustrates like two different objects being created. Okay, for the prototype scope. Okay, and where it is in a kind of a singleton. Okay, if you define a singleton, it would always refer the only one object. Okay, for your clarification, I will again change this to singleton and make sure like the same object would be referred in our code. Singleton, I have changed this singleton, and let me run this application. So both the objects would refer the same object one, because it would only create one and irrespective of how many number of invocations of the particular object rectangle, it would refer the same object one. So even if you call multiple times as well, it would refer the same object. So this is the concept of singleton prototype. Hope you like this video. If you like this video, please click on the like button and do subscribe to my channel.